share it on the blog. But hi, happy Friday. I'm so excited to be back here in the community again. We try to do these Facebook Lives every single week because it's a way for us to stay connected with the community. Today, I have a super special guest, and I'm so excited to introduce her. But before we get started and jump into the interview with one of my best friends in the world, I'm just going to wait a minute, see if anyone joins. Let me know if you're watching. Say hello, give us a like, give us a heart, let us know where you're calling from, because as always, we like to make these calls as interactive as possible. And then we are dialing in from Zoom, so I'm going to be checking back and forth. So please make sure you ask questions and really just share what's coming up for you today, because this is for you. So with that, I'm so excited to welcome my dear friend, Emmy Favilla. She's one of my best friends in the world. We go way back. We met in high school. I don't know if everyone had a chance to read the blog for this week, but we met in class because Emmy and I had similar interests in music at that time. And we've been besties ever since. And I've been so privileged to watch Emmy grow and kill it in her career. And it wasn't, it didn't hit me right away how unique her approach to career growth was, but that's what I picked up on lately as she's become a published author. She has a book out, which I'll let her tell you about. She's a senior manager at BuzzFeed, and I've seen her, just climb the ranks working at amazing companies like Teen Vogue, 17, where, she started her career earlier on, and then now BuzzFeed, and I'm seeing her move up there, and it's amazing. So with that, I'm going to take a pause and just say welcome, Emmy. I'm so happy that we're chatting today.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to be a part of this Facebook Live event this week. And yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you and share my stories and hopefully, provide some insight to people sort of either struggling or, kind of not sure, where they want their career path to sort of lead to. And that's okay, basically.
Yeah. And we'll get into that. And I like to pick out a theme for all of our Facebook Lives, and especially when we do these Work Bigger stories on the blog. And the theme that I picked out for you in your interview was possibility, confidence, and flow, and how we can use more of that to grow our careers. Because what I see so much of is hustle hard and do. And I think taking action is so important, but I'm also seeing that when you tap into the flow, and we can talk a little bit more about that, it just makes the whole process so much more enjoyable. Mm-hmm. And I know whether you're starting a business or you're looking for a job or you're looking to transition within your organization, it can feel really demoralizing, that process of career growth and change. So my goal is, how do we empower the community and the women in this group, just so that it's a little bit easier? Like, the transition shouldn't be so painful. So super excited to talk about that today. And again, if you're watching live, I see some people have joined. Let us know what questions come up for you and where you're struggling in terms of your career change, so that Emmy and I can address it directly. So with that, Emmy, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your background in terms of, your career in life?
Sure. So I grew up in New York City, between Brooklyn and Queens, and that's how I met you, because we went to high school together in Queens. And I always knew that I wanted to do something involving writing. I loved writing as a child, as a teenager. As I mentioned in the interview on your blog post, when I was a little kid, I would, fold pieces of paper and make mini books when I was, like 6 years old, maybe. And I've always loved reading, and I've always loved writing. And I guess I wasn't sure like what that would manifest as a career. But in high school, I joined the newspaper, and I was like, oh, journalism, that's a cool way to make a living and, pursue my passion for writing while also sort of being a viable career path, as opposed to, writing books and being a creative writer, which is harder to, to straight out of college kind of make a career being a creative writer. For me, I felt that, going the journalism route would be, would just be kind of better in terms of like career security, and I would find my way, because at that time, so I went to NYU for journalism, and I graduated NYU in 2005. And at that time, the media landscape was super exciting because the internet had sort of just started becoming a thing that print publications realized they had to also incorporate into their business model. So there were tons of opportunities. And while I was in college, I did a bunch of internships at magazines. I kind of realized that the track I wanted to go down was magazines. And primarily at that point, I was thinking women's lifestyle magazines, health magazines. I've always been very interested in health and lifestyle. I actually toyed with the idea of majoring in nutrition, but I wound up going the journalism path. Yeah. So I've always been
I remember that.
Yeah. And it's always, it's like food and food science and nutrition is still something that I'm super interested in and read about. And, but yeah, so in my head, I was thinking, maybe I'll work for a women's lifestyle magazine as a writer or editor. And then through my series of internships, again, as is mentioned in your blog post, I realized that I was good at copy editing. And so I started out, my very first internship at a magazine was at a place called Grace Woman magazine. And it was a very small, independent magazine that was maybe around for like 2 or 3 years. There's absolutely no evidence of it on the internet. If you search for it, it's like it never even existed. But it was really cool because I was a sophomore in college. I was 19, and it was, this cool new world for me. I was like, oh my God, I'm working at a glossy magazine, even though it was a magazine no one had ever heard of. And the great part about starting off interning at a place that wasn't, a bigger name publication is that I really got to, dip my feet in a lot of different areas. So I would go on appointments with the lifestyle editor to like see home decor, new pieces of home decor. And then I would help the photo department with stuff. And then they had a freelance copy editor who would come in when the magazine was closing. And she had asked me, if I wanted to help copy edit. And of course I was like, sure, I'll do anything you guys want me to. And that's kind of when I realized, oh, I'm good at copy editing. And it's never, I never thought of myself as like someone who was particularly interested in grammar and that sort of thing in college, but I kind of just fell into it. And I decided to take a class, when I was at NYU in copy editing on Fridays at 8:30 in the morning, and everyone was like, wow, you must really love copy editing to take this class at 8:30 on a Friday. So that, and then just, various internships doing all sorts of stuff. I always would volunteer to help the copy editor on staff or the freelance copy editor who they had in when a magazine was closing. And I kind of realized that I was good at it and I could make a career out of it. It wasn't something that I'd really ever considered. In my head, I was like, oh, I'm going to be, a writer, a top editor, not necessarily like a more technical oriented copy editor. But yeah, so that happened. And I should also mention that I did a couple of other internships throughout my college undergraduate years. I interned at a book publisher, a small print called Soho Press. I interned at a PR agency. So I did a couple of things, all sort of tangential to media, like magazine media. But I wanted to see if there was something that would draw me from these other, other industries as well. But it wasn't really for me. And then what happened? So I was a senior in high school. My final internship before I graduated was at Stuff magazine, which was a super cool magazine that folded a couple years after. And it was like a sister magazine to Maxim.
Yeah, I remember that.
And my manager at the time was the copy chief on staff, and I would help her. And she was like, wow, you're actually really good at this. And she sat me in a room, and I consider her my mentor because I had never really sought out mentors. You know, there are a lot of things like looking back that I'm like, I really could have done a lot more for myself had I had like the knowledge of, that I do now. But, whatever, it all worked out. But I really consider her my mentor because she was the one who made it clear that I could apply for a job as a copy editor straight out of college and get one. And so she sat me in a room with a copy test, and she was like, here, go do this, take this copy test. I'll come back in an hour and we'll go over it together. I'll let you know if there's any, what you missed, what you can improve on. And and that was great. And then she actually encouraged me to apply for a position at 17 magazine, which was my first job out of college, for an associate copy editor. It was an entry-level position. And that's where I started. And I sort of just went from there. I've worked as a copy editor at several different magazines. I worked as a copywriter for fashion brands. But primarily I've been a copy editor since then. And throughout all of my copy editing jobs, I always made sure to ask if I could do other things as well. Especially because before the internet was more of, was important for business models, we would have a very finite production schedule, right? So for 2 weeks out of the year at a print magazine, you're sort of, you're kind of chilling, and, things are coming together, stories are coming together. And then for the final 2 weeks of the production cycle, everyone's sort of scrambling to get things in, get things to the printer, out on time, copy edited. So for those initial 2 weeks where it wasn't super busy, I really wanted to make sure that, I took advantage of being in all of these positions. And I would always ask, hey, is there anything else I can do? Can I write? Can I take ownership of certain sections of the magazine? And at 17, I was able to do that. And so in addition to being a copy editor, I was also editing our contributors page. I was writing pieces. So that was really cool. And that's where I learned, like, hey, I can actually just ask to do other things. And, it was a very empowering sort of.
I want to dig in a little bit right there because that's something that stood out to me in the blog post, this idea of like that you can break away from your current position to touch other areas of your company and essentially expand your opportunities and your skill set. How did that approach that early in your career help you get to where you are today?
I think that gave me the confidence that I could ask, and the worst that could happen is, higher management would say, no, we already have someone working on that, or no, you're not qualified for that yet. And the best case scenario, which did happen for me at 17, was that they were like, yeah, sure, go ahead, do whatever you want. Like, do you want to take ownership of this part? Do you want to write this? And I think that gave me the confidence to not just sort of be comfortable in my role and do only the duties that were part of the job description. And I think I'm lucky to have learned that early on. And I think it was honestly it was sort of just an organic thing that was a byproduct of, the production cycle being slower for 2 weeks out of the year, where I just thought, I don't want to sit around twiddling my thumbs, waiting for things to come in and doing busy work. I want to actually make an impact. And if I have the time, why can't I do that? So.
Yeah. And this is actually where I have a question for the community and the women who are watching live. This approach is, it's this approach of like being proactive at work, right? And I'm wondering if anyone else has, especially if you're in a 9 to 5 that maybe you're not super excited about. I wonder if you've taken this approach, and curious what the response has been from your companies. Because what I'm hearing you say, Emmy, is that you are really proactive in seeking out other opportunities, which I think we can always encourage people to do more of. But then you also had a really positive response. So I'm curious if people in the community have been in similar situations and what the response has been. So just a question out there for all of you ladies watching. And I'm going to just check in back and forth to see as comments are coming in. What I want to talk about now is, well, let me backtrack. Okay, actually, I want to talk about what you're doing now at BuzzFeed and then how you got to being a published author, which is amazing because I actually love what you said at the beginning of our call now. You said, you know, pursuing like creative writing or like writing a book that had felt hard, and then now you're doing it. So
yeah, that was super exciting. Yeah, just to actually like see one of my goals, one of my life goals be realized was a really exciting moment.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about what you're doing now.
So I guess I'll start off with how I joined BuzzFeed and that that role that I took on when I first started. So I had been the copy chief at Teen Vogue, and then I left and I did a bit of copywriting for Delia's and Alloy, which are like sort of teen fashion brand sister brands. And then a former colleague of mine had started working for this little startup called BuzzFeed, and it was 2012. And he said, "Hey, we're hiring a copy editor for the first time, and I really think you should apply." And I remember looking at the site and being like, this is a mess. Like, what even is this website? I'd never heard of it. Only that year they had hired an editor-in-chief, and that's when they started ramping up news coverage. So they really started building a team of reporters and writers. And when I joined, they were kind of just moving from being the site that, you know, aggregated content and posted cat gifs and, you know, pictures of like hamsters wearing hats and stuff to actually being a source for news. So I applied for the job. I got the job. It was great. And talk about like living from a place of possibility. There was so much possibility when I first started at BuzzFeed. It was unlike any other job I've ever had. Again, I am very lucky to have landed in that role at that time. But because I was the first copy editor that they'd ever hired, I essentially had to create my own system and figure out how to copy edit a site that had never before employed a copy editor. The editor-in-chief, Ben Smith, had told me, you know, oh, Twitter's been our copy editor. Whenever we have a typo, you know, someone will tweet at me and then I'll fix it. And I'm like, oh my God, like, what am I even doing here? So I created a system, and then over the next year, BuzzFeed totally exploded. So it went from me saying, you know, hey, I work here, and people responding with, what is that? I've never heard of that website, to over the course of like 6 months, people being like, oh my God, can you get me a job there? So, you know, it really like it took off shortly after I joined. I think, you know, more so than it had ever had since it had been founded. And as a result, our staff grew exponentially. We were producing tons and tons of content, and I could not feasibly, you know, do all this work myself. And I was basically like, if you want the news that we're producing and all of the other, you know, entertainment content that we're producing to be edited the way that I've been editing it, like I'm going to get to maybe like 0.1%, you know, of everything on my own. So essentially I was able to build a team, and that team grew to an international team. First I hired an intern who is still with the company, and she's now the copy chief, which is really amazing to see her, you know, grow from an intern to leading the team. So I built a team of about 7 people. It's fluctuated, but roughly it's been 7 people. An international copy team in New York, LA, and London. And so I was initially the copy editor, then I was promoted. And then my role was global copy chief before I left the copy desk this past September. And while I was copy chief, I was very inspired by a lot of my coworkers writing books. And honestly, like that's kind of what pushed me to pursue the idea of writing a book myself. I saw everyone.
And were they writing books like on their own
Yeah, they were writing books on their own. I saw a couple of my coworkers, get book deals and publish books and talk about projects they had in the works. And I was super inspired, and I saw that they were able to get all the duties of their workday fulfilled and also work on these side projects and really kill it. And I thought, wow, maybe I can do that too. And I thought about what would be the best topic to explore if I were to actually sit down and write a book. And then I was like, why don't I just use my experiences, at BuzzFeed writing. Oh, so I left out a big part is that I also wrote the style guide at BuzzFeed.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the impetus for this book. So when I first started, there was no style guide. Just a quick note, I guess, for anyone who isn't maybe totally familiar with what a style guide means, set of standards, guidelines for writing, how to style phrases, preferred terminology. So I created a style guide for the site, and it expanded, and, even to this day, we're constantly updating it and revising it. And we published it live on the site, like a year after I started working on it. And so I thought I could maybe write a book about grammar and language and the evolution of language, because working at BuzzFeed it's been such a unique experience. First, in terms of the content that, that I'm faced with every day, or I was faced with in my role every day, ranging from silly kind of lighthearted posts about, like Lady Gaga hiking but wearing stilettos on her hike, but then also, hard-hitting investigative journalism pieces about, injustices or abuses going on at like a mental health facility. So the range of stuff that I would read every day required me to be in a different mindset for, in terms of editing it, because sometimes for like the sillier, lighthearted posts, it was totally fine to write something in all capital letters with no punctuation if like you sort of wanted to create the effect that like you're screaming into a black hole, like, oh my God, I can't believe this celebrity just did this, whereas you had to take a more traditional approach with traditional news stories. So I was just kind of thinking about that. I mean, that's the gist of the book in a nutshell, how language has evolved and how we've how technology and the evolution of our language intersect, and a little bit of, grammar and punctuation and how that's changed, and slang terms, and, etiquette for email and things like that. But yeah, I decided, hey, I have expertise in this world, and there hasn't yet been a book published before that explores this in a way that is conversational and lighthearted, not academic. I mean, there are tons of reference books and more academic books about, like the science of language changing and linguistics and things like that. But I kind of wanted to write something in the BuzzFeed voice that was accessible. Even if you don't necessarily consider yourself like a word nerd, you would enjoy it and enjoy reading about the way that how we communicate has has evolved because of the internet, basically, and texting and that sort of stuff, and how it's happened at a turbocharged rate, it seems, over the past like 20 years or so because of the internet and our phones at our side all the time. So I came up with this basic framework for the idea of the book, and I presented it to my editor-in-chief, and I said, what do you think about this? And we agreed that the best way for me to execute this the way I wanted to, which, and the book is called A World Without Whom.
Yeah.
the essential guide to language in the BuzzFeed age. And the way that I wanted to execute it, I wanted it to be fun and have screenshots of, Slack conversations and emails from staff and just sort of funny questions that I've been asked as a copy editor. And in order for me to do that, there were all these legal loopholes, and BuzzFeed actually owns the rights to the book, which is totally fine. But, it's a very BuzzFeed centric book. Obviously, it's in the title, and it's, the first chapter is all about the birth of the BuzzFeed style guide. But, it was really exciting to see it come to life and, see my vision come to life and actually have something to hold in my hands that, I've always wanted to write a book. And I never would have imagined as a teenager that I would write a book about, grammar and language evolving, but it's just kind of where my career and life took me. And I thought, hey, I know about this, so I'll write about it, and I'll write about it in a funny way.
Yeah. One thing that comes up for me as you're talking about the book is, I remember when it came out, and it's unique in that it really pushes the boundaries on language, right? And I know too, just from working at the Associated Press, that when you're a word nerd, like you're very, like there's a lot of rules that you have to follow. And one of my favorite things, even as you were on your book tour and I came to a couple of your speaking events, that you were talking about doing something that was really pushing the envelope in your industry. And I know that not everybody was for it. So you've received some criticism, especially from like more traditional word nerds, I don't know what to call them, or like linguistics, whatever. So maybe talk a little bit just about what that's been like in terms of going against tradition in a sense, and that was another reason I wanted us to have this conversation, because at Work Bigger, like we're here to really challenge the status quo and to think differently about the way things are done. So as I was watching you on your book tour, I loved your message that we can redefine something as old as the language in order to fit the construct of society today. But maybe talk a little bit about that, and then just dealing with the criticism on the other side.
Yeah. So first, I expected criticism from the get-go, because there are a lot of people who just don't like BuzzFeed and want to jab at anything that BuzzFeed does. And there are trolls on Twitter who realize that the BuzzFeed style guide has their own Twitter account, and they're like, oh my God, BuzzFeed has copy editors, you would never know. So I was definitely expecting criticism from that. And yeah, as you mentioned, the message of the book basically is that we need to start challenging and questioning the language rules that, we've always traditionally been taught to abide by in classic guidebooks like, Elements of Style and even the Asian Style book, because sometimes those rules just don't make sense in modern context. And there isn't really a style book that caters to, texting language or, kind of things that are rooted like words and terminology that's rooted in technology itself. For instance, on Facebook, how you have many different reactions. This is one example that I touch on in the book. When you like something, that's easy enough, but then there are, there's the sad there's a sad reaction, there's the wow reaction, and how do you verbify that form? Do you say like, I sadded his status, or, things like that. I thought that it was really important to have guidelines for, and so that was part of it. And sort of just challenging the fact that language evolves, and if language did not evolve, it would die, and it would be Latin. And our language is a living language, and it's really cool, and it's something that should be celebrated. The fact that we're coming up with new ways to describe things. We're coming up with new ways to add tone to things by sometimes maybe not using punctuation, or by using tons of punctuation, or by using only punctuation. If someone responds to you with a bunch of exclamation marks, that's that's language itself. That's a message itself that doesn't even require any words. It's sort of like, oh, excitement. Obviously, you don't need words to kind of get the gist of what someone is feeling if they just text you a bunch of, exclamation marks. So things like that. And yeah, and I just kind of thought, so many things in our world evolve, from clothes we wear to, food science and what's healthy now and what's not. There was like the fat-free craze in the 90s, and then there was like the South Beach diet, and like all these things in our life evolve, except for language, which is thought to be this sort of fixed, stagnant thing by a lot of more traditional editors, linguists, lexicographers, whoever, is in that word nerd community. And I really wanted to challenge that, because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to stick to the rules that we were using 50 years ago, because you watch a movie from 50 years ago and you can tell that it's from 50 years ago because people speak differently. So I just thought it was really important to kind of get that all out there. And I think I was definitely expecting criticism from, more traditional people, people with a more traditional mindset, maybe people who, who have been editors at, newspapers and, have been doing it for years and just sort of have this fixed way of thinking about things and fixed ideas for what's wrong and what's right, and kind of explain, it doesn't do us any favors to resist the change that we're already seeing. Like every year, there's like a new language sort of trend, and we don't even realize that we're doing it. And I think that, I think it was just really important to kind of make people aware that we don't need to listen to, the traditional grammar rules all the time, because it doesn't further, the discussion about things, and and
it keeps things stagnant, right? Yeah. So and I think that mindset can be applied to everything, right? It's the same approach that I think when we think about innovation and where that comes from, it's from challenging current thinking and thinking differently about where we're at. And I think it's that same idea. And I think, like, yes, there was criticism, but I think that's also why your book was so well received. And I think continues to be well received, because it is championing like a different way of thinking, which is so important. And I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we have a couple minutes left, and I want to cover two more areas, because I think it's important to just talk about going with the flow when it comes to career growth, and then also confidence, right? I think those are two really important things. One thing I want to touch on, going back to the flow that we were talking about earlier, is I do remember, and we're switching gears here a little bit, and for anyone who's watching, hi Lucy, hi Morgan. Morgan said, I had never thought about language as being alive. I love that. Yeah, I agree. I think you described it really beautifully. You're such a word nerd. So, like, romantic for you. But yeah, for anyone who's watching, would love to know just what questions are coming up for you. Feel free to share them in the comments, and we'll address them as we go. But I want to talk about, like, going with the flow. I remember you and I, Emmy, were having a conversation, I think years ago. And I said to you, I was like, wow, I feel like you don't even try with your career. Like, opportunities just come your way. And you were like, yeah, like I and it wasn't from, it was, no. And it wasn't like that. It was this carefree feeling that I felt from you. It wasn't anything of like arrogance, nothing like that. It was so positive. And to me, that was really inspiring on a personal level, because I've always been so type A, such a control freak since like way back. I remember being 12 years old and like planning out my whole life and career, and none of it worked out as I planned it. But I think that planning and that structure, that certainty that I craved, was actually really painful for me. Like it felt often like I was pushing against the wall. And one thing that I've been working to do, even now as I run Work Bigger full time, is to tap into the flow more and work from a place of flow for a number of reasons. I believe that's really how we can solve big problems, right? Tapping into our creativity and tapping into our intuition, which I think we don't do enough, especially as women. And I feel like that is our greatest resource. And I think it also just feels better. Like we're here in the world to be happy and to feel joy. And sometimes we forget that, because especially for women who are really ambitious, we get so focused on the goals, and like feeling joy is a purpose, that's why we're here. So when you and I, that conversation especially stood out to me, even though it was years ago now, it made an impression because it just felt like that's what you've been doing. You've been going with the flow, and you even said it. I didn't really imagine myself being a copy editor. You kind of like followed, you stayed open to what's possible. So can you talk maybe a little bit about what that's been like for you, the going with the flow, and also just what it feels like?
Right. Well, okay. I mean, that's not to say that I think a lot of it is rooted in all the work that I put in, like on the back end, like when I was in college, making so many connections is just so, like, everyone says that and you don't realize how important it is. And it's crazy to me that now, with Twitter, you can literally get in touch with anyone ever. I'm going off on a tangent here, but I think it's so cool that you can, like when I was searching for jobs, I kind of, was in like a sea of, I didn't know what I was doing. And I just thought, hey, I'm going to apply to a bunch of jobs that I maybe have like at least a minute interest in, and see where that goes. And, throughout all of my internships, I kind of just, I tried to make a lot of connections with people. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I never saw myself being a copy editor, but these opportunities came up and I thought, hey, I would love to work at 17. Ideally, I would have preferred at that time to work there as a writer or maybe in the fashion closet, which, after having worked at fashion magazines, I would never, ever want to work in a fashion closet. But at that point, it just seemed so glamorous and cool to me. And I just thought, okay, well, if anything, at least this is a foot in the door and I can meet the people who I can make connections with to maybe move to another position. But that didn't end up happening. I wound up staying at a copy editor and that being my career trajectory. And yeah, and my next job after that was through a former colleague from 17 who was now working at another publication. And so I kind of, I landed a lot of jobs through previous connections. And I think, I also think that, like, I guess I can make a connection with my current situation now, where a couple of months ago, or actually it's almost in September, it'll be a year, I totally moved departments. I had been feeling kind of a little bored. I feel like I felt like I had hit a plateau, just in terms of where I could go as a copy editor. I was managing a global team for a few years. I wrote a book, and I felt like obviously you can always continue to learn, and you should continue to learn new things, and until the day you die, we're always learning new things. But for me, I had reached a saturation point. And I wanted to do something different. And I saw an open job at BuzzFeed in a different role for our shopping team, and I decided to apply for it, and I went for it. And yeah, I think it's really important just to be open to these new possibilities. And I've never thought that you shouldn't be open to these. I don't know. It's just like, I can't even explain. I kind of have always just gone with the flow. And it's sort of like, if I got a job offer for a job that I wasn't like, if it wasn't like my dream job, I took it anyway, because I figured, I can forge connections here.
Oh, we lost sound. It's muffled.
Can no.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. Yeah, if I was offered a job or a freelance opportunity or anything that wasn't something that, I had ever kind of thought as my dream job or a dream opportunity, I often took it anyway because I just thought, maybe I can learn things that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. Maybe I can make connections here. So I think that's really important. And I, it's just kind of the way that I live my life, and I think that everyone can benefit from being open in that way, because if you, like you said, if you have this linear idea of what you need to do at point A before you get to point B before you get to point C, and things don't work out as planned, you're just fighting against yourself there, and you're going to get frustrated, and you're probably not going to make the most of your situation and the people who are around you, because you're feeling unhappy that things aren't going as planned. So I think it's just it's
being detached, being a little detached, and that doesn't mean that you don't care, that you're not driven, but being like staying open.
Yes.
And I think that there's a difference, right? Like it doesn't have to be black or white. You can be super ambitious and have a big vision, but also detach from the how a little bit. Yeah. The last thing I want to talk about is confidence. And you hit on this in your interview. As you're transitioning into, or as you've been transitioning into a new role, there's a discomfort, right, that comes with
absolutely.
changes. And I know with the ladies who are watching, I know this is also relevant for some of you. There's that, right? So dealing with that discomfort, there was also a period of time when you decided to teach classes at Media Bistro. And I remember when you did that, and I don't remember how old we were. This was a few years ago. But I remember
28.
Yeah, I remember thinking like, oh my God, that's so scary. Good for you, Emmy. So
I was terrified.
I'm sure, because especially I feel like, the idea, like when you're pretty new in your career, the idea of teaching others, like talk about imposter syndrome, especially I think for women, it's like, oh my God, that's so terrifying. Can you talk through where you found that confidence to push through that experience, and then even now in your new role?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually sought out the opportunity to teach. I was looking at Media Bistro for freelance opportunities. When I was a copywriter, I was sort of still craving something. I wasn't feeling super satisfied in my role at the time. This was the role right before I joined BuzzFeed. And yeah, so I guess I was maybe like 28 or so when I started teaching classes through Media Bistro. And I started off doing an intro to copy editing course. And I thought, okay, this is going to be challenging, but it's an intro class. I've got this. I've been a copy editor for, at that point, like 6 years. And even though, you're still mid, it's not, I wasn't early in my career, but it's like relatively early. I'd only been.
It's not like you have 10 years of experience.
Right, exactly. And I just sort of, I went for it. And, I remember before teaching the first class, I was terrified. I was even more terrified when people started coming into the classroom, and I noticed that most of them were older than me. And I was just like, oh my God, are these people even going to take me seriously? Like I'm this 20-something.
What did you do in that first class? Do you remember how you got through that?
Yeah, I just went for it. I just thought, hey, like you guys are here because you're here to learn, and I have the information that you want to learn. So I'm going to give you that information. And I kind of just had to remind myself of that every single time I taught the class, every time I emailed feedback to people. And, sometimes there would be students who were a little more difficult than others. And I always just had to remind myself, you're the expert in this situation. This is why you were hired to teach the class. Like you were a copy chief. People thought that you were qualified enough to teach this class. And I just kind of had to keep reminding myself. And then I wound up teaching for several years, and taking on more advanced classes, which, was scary as well, because, I was like, oh, intro to copy editing, that's easy enough. I've got the basics down. But yeah, I just had to constantly remind myself, like, these people are taking a class because they don't know this stuff. I know this stuff. And it was simple. It sounds so silly and simple, but that is really what helped me get that confidence. And just doing more classes over time, the more I did, the more I felt like, okay, I've got this. I got a handle. It was my first time teaching anything ever. So of course things are going to be a little nerve wracking. But as you do more and more classes and as I would repeat the course, I kind of got into, I got into a rhythm and I realized, what worked, what didn't. I learned from my mistakes and and then in my current role, so I transitioned over to the shopping team in September. And so my current role is a senior commerce editor. So I manage several people on the market team, which is basically our shopping team. I edit stories, I write, I strategize content based on, what's been converting well. We work a lot with affiliate marketing. So, our main goal is to drive revenue for the company. So that's been a totally different world for me. And at first I was scared, but that fear was what excited me. And I was so excited to learn new things and figure out, how are people shopping and what compels people to buy, how that whole world works, and how the company generates revenue. It was just a totally, totally different world from what I'd been doing, copy editing other people's content. And now I'm also creating my own content, and strategizing things and analyzing. And it's been so exciting. And of course, the first couple of months I was like, oh my God, my posts are not really hitting, no one's clicking into them and, buying the things that so we do a lot of product recommendations, product reviews, things like that. But then I kind of realized, what works, what doesn't. And I knew going in that it wouldn't be, I'd be like off to, I'd just be like a rocket launcher, like all the way up as soon as I started in the role. So I kind of I expected it to be a slow,
it takes time.
It takes time, learning the ins and outs of it. And even though it's still at the same company and I'm still working and I'm working with a lot of people who I've worked with over the past few years, it's in a totally different capacity. So, I've had to shift my mindset. But every day I just try to, learn from my manager, learn from other managers on the team. Any emails that are sent out, with like analytical information, I try to read those in their entirety instead of just skimming over things, just because I really want to understand, the ins and outs of this role and of this, and of this part of media. A lot of new media companies are moving to affiliate marketing, and old media companies are also moving toward affiliate marketing as a business model. And I really want to understand it and get a handle on it and, and make it work for us. That's my goal in this role. And I also, manage a team as well. So so it's kind of just been, being patient with myself and realizing that I might not see immediate success. But as long as I am improving upon, my previous work and I'm learning, that's the goal.
Yeah.
And that's where I find joy.
And Shelly, hi, I'm so glad you could join. She said something really wonderful, so I just want to read it to you. She said, she's an example of how confidence comes from the doing and it grows. Fear loves uncertainty. So the more we push ourselves, the more opportunity for the fear to pop up. Then we push through the fear and the confidence grows, which is so important. Yeah. So it's like you feel the fear, you have that awareness of it, and then you take deliberate action, to push through that. And I think what I see happening all the time when you're not doing that, the opposite side is like we feel the fear and then we like fight or flight, right? So, and that's how we don't make progress. So it's your openness, Emmy, your openness and your mindset that's like so amazing and powerful. And that's why I wanted to have you on today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you've been amazing. So I know we're like past our time, so I'm going to check in once more. If anyone who is watching, thank you ladies for joining live. Shelly said, how did she get this way? Aw. It's because she's friends with me, Shelly. I'm just kidding. Yeah, if the community, thank you ladies again for watching live. If you have any follow-up questions for Emmy, what's the best way for everyone to stay in touch with you or to follow you? Like, what do you recommend?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at M-3, so it's EM_DASH3. And you can find me on Facebook, on Instagram, my BuzzFeed email, it's emmy.favilla@buzzfeed.com. I'm all over the place. So
yeah. Thank you so much for doing this call. You guys may also see, for the New York ladies, you may also see Emmy at some of our Work Bigger events. She's been a huge supporter always, and tends to come out here and there, so you may also meet her in person. But thank you, Emmy, you're the best, and it's so fun to just to just chat with you and talk about all of this, because I feel like there's so much to learn from your approach, and to me it's been super inspiring, as I said before. So I just love you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you ladies for joining. Feel free, if you're catching up later, pop any comments or questions in there, and happy to put you in touch with Emmy too. And check out her book, A World Without Whom. What's the second part? I always forget it.
The Essential Guide to Language in the BuzzFeed Age. But
yes. And also I just have to share this. So I cried because Emmy, I'm in the dedication section, which still makes me emotional. It's the sweetest thing ever.
Well, you have been a huge inspiration to me, and I feel like you have always pushed me to do more and be more. And you've always, even in college, you were like, hey, when are you going to write a book? And I was like, I can't write a book. I don't have anything to write about. And I'm never going to write a book, and I feel like you have always pushed me. And I feel like that is such a testament to your success with Work Bigger, because you really work to bring out the confidence and the best qualities in the people who you mentor, and and who you provide advice to. And
thank you, that is so kind. But if you get her book, you'll see my name in there, and I was so touched. And then one last thing I'll say is Emmy's a killer singer, and that's another thing I've been encouraging her to do since we were in high school. So Emmy, I hope that's next for you. All right, thank you so much everyone, and have a great weekend, and we'll chat soon. Bye.